What's up, everybody? This is Adam from AdMine Analytics, and you're listening to the AdMine Analytics podcast. More people than ever are trying to tie all their marketing data together in a way that helps them actually move the needle for performance. Why do I say actually? Well, because more often than not, tech tools are overpromised, marketing teams are understaffed, and the data just keeps pouring in, which all lead to marketing analytics data that's just not quite helpful enough. On this show, our founder and I discuss all things marketing analytics to help you navigate those complicated waters so you can measure the impact of your marketing and use that data to push your business to the next level. All right, welcome back in. We thank you for spending some time with us today on this podcast. Mike, as a quick opening question for the group here, where's the last place that you listened to a podcast? Like, where were you physically while listening to podcast content?
25 minutes ago at the gym.
All right. Getting swole while expanding your mind. Awesome.
What about you? Where was the last time you listened to one?
Driving. I have a hard time listening to podcast content while I'm lifting because it requires more mental energy than I can give to the content.
That's because you exert more physical energy. I've seen you lift. I have a lot of energy left over still.
All right. Very good. Today, we're talking about categorizing data. The question that we had talked about is, what would be the most impactful thing that a marketing team could do as they're starting out? If they're saying, we want to get better at our marketing analytics data, we have needs, we have reports, we have things we want to do. We're saying that the most impactful thing they can do to start things off is give some thought, at the very least, give some thought to how they would categorize their data, whether it's like basic level of thought. We're going to get into that through like a fully fleshed out content, category, data, form, all that stuff kind of plan. If that foundation is there, then it makes the analytics data so much more meaningful as a company like us comes in and begins to engineer the data and connect everything, if they've sort of given some thought. Now, if they haven't, we can obviously walk them through that process, but we're assuming that most of the people that would be listening to this content have not done that just yet. And so we want to just talk about things that would be helpful for them to think about. So when I made the mistake of as a marketer, I started going, well, categorizing, and then I changed the word in my mind from data to content, because that's like what's most near and dear to my worldview. And you sort of corrected me and said, no, Adam, it's categorizing. It goes beyond that. So I'm going to hand it to you and say, okay, take me to the highest level. Let's like walk through, give me what are the things that we need to categorize. We'll sort of make a list, and then we'll kind of go through them in practical application with how it might work on a website that does lead gen and e-com and kind of represents most people's general situations out there. So give us that overview.
I'm going to give you that overview, but I'm going to precede it with a little bit of a story, like from the data science world. So there's been a lot of like in the last, even, I mean, if you're an actuary or something, you guys think that you've been doing this long before the data scientists people, and you're probably right. But there's been a lot of effort that's happened in the last 40 years in developing fairly fancy algorithms to do things with data, to try to learn stuff about data. And those things vary from things like there's algorithms that are called clustering algorithms, and they try to find similarities between data and build groups of them together. So they'll say, oh, these give a bunch of different data points, a bunch representing people, maybe, for example. And we have for each person, we know their ethnic background, we know their preferences, we know where they live, we know what ages they are. And if you get more into the actuarial stuff, these guys are always trying to predict diseases and like likelihood to have an insurance claim or something. So you take all of those parameters that you know about a person, and then you feed it to some math algorithm that says, how closely related are these people together, and tries to build groups, the most logical sets of groups. So those are clustering algorithms. There's another set of algorithms that are like anomaly detection algorithms, where you say, let's look at a period of data over time, and maybe it varies a lot, maybe it varies just a little bit, but can we pick out a point or some points that are far enough away from what is average that we would consider them worth looking at? And that's sort of an anomaly detection scheme. There's a bunch of like signal processing sort of technologies to say, how can we make radio sound clearer? How can we know how far away something is from the back of a bumper of a vehicle? And so it gives us some sort of an idea of like a call and response or audio processing. In all those areas of study, one of the things that practitioners in the real world, so mathematicians develop some of these amazing algorithms to build like to get really nice, clean and clear clustering, or really great like signal detection to determine the length of something's a distance away from an object or something. One of the things that in the real world practitioners learn is that you can try a lot of those algorithms have like things that you can tune, little levers that you can tune. You can say, well, we want to take the alpha level and like crank that thing down a little bit. This kind of starts to feel like Photoshop a little, like when you're looking at, I don't even know what some of these things are. What if I turn down the hue and the saturation? Like, what does that even do? Like that you can manipulate those algorithms. And so you can spend, as a practitioner, you can spend a bunch of time trying to get good results by manipulating the little features of the algorithm. Or you can say, I can try to change the data that I feed into the algorithm. And what real world practitioners know, data scientists are nodding their head right now, that you get 10 times more value by manipulating the data that you put into the algorithm than you do by tweaking the knobs in the algorithms. And that's because the algorithms know nothing about business context. So now let's take this to the marketing layer here and say, if we just give an algorithm to say, what's important, the what is important algorithm, and we just feed it all of the individual actions that somebody takes on a website. Here's this one they scrolled. Here's one where they clicked on something. Here's where a form was submitted. Here's where a new page loaded. That algorithm, maybe if it's trying to find clusters of behavior or to determine what's important, won't know anything about scroll on somebody's site for a given piece of content is way meaningful. And on another site, it's absolutely meaningless. And the algorithm that addresses those things has no idea. So you can make it way more powerful. You can get way more return on your brain power investment by preparing the data to feed to the algorithm, by giving it, rather than just random activities, you can say, let's categorize some of those activities. Let's call this set of activities we actually know that there's no chance we'll ever care about. Let's not even feed those in. Let's not create noise for that algorithm to try to filter out. So this is the learning here is actually a learning from like data science. The learning is that we can learn so much more about our marketing data and what the behavior, how to manipulate the behaviors of people to draw them closer to our products and offerings by categorizing the data before we start to analyze. Categorize ahead of analyze.
So what you're saying is there's the amount of return that you would get by modifying GA4 or modifying whatever other analytics tool you're using and making adjustments there, time, segment, all those kinds of things, that you get way more bang for your buck by being thoughtful about how you organize the content that went into those things than you do about adjusting it on the back end.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the specific marketing examples. We can go through a list a little bit longer, but here's one that's like one of the most impactful ones to me. The source, one of the things that's an obvious business context, something that matters to the marketer, is how you're driving visitors to go to a website, the source that leads somebody to actually load up your website. If you just like jump straight into Google Analytics right out of the box, or Adobe Analytics right out of Adobe actually doesn't even have this stuff out of the box. But if you jump into Amplitude out of the box or something, or Heap, it will give you some generic groupings. It'll give you, like Google Analytics has generic channel groupings. And those channel groupings are good if you're saying, let's take all of the marketing efforts in the world and try to break them up into some group. But they don't represent your marketing efforts very directly. They'll have like organic search and paid search, direct and referral. Like referral is a great example. Like how many people consider all of their non-paid, non-organic search traffic just referral? Most people they have channel partnerships. You probably have relationships in your industry where you're creating content in we'll post for you, you post for us, sort of a thing. So if you can get so much more bang for your buck spending some time thinking about how do we actually, where are we spending money? And what is the intent difference between the way that we're driving people at the top of our funnel versus the bottom of our funnel? And taking those sort of questions and saying, how can we define a set of channels that tightly align to intent and where we're actually spending dollars? Then when you pull up a report, rather than getting paid search versus direct traffic, you get paid search shopping, paid search branded, paid search competitor, paid search non-branded. And all those have very different costs and very different intent levels. And so when you start to look at those things and see performance differences, it becomes obvious to you very quickly. Your analysis gets super fast. You go like, oh, great. I can see really quickly that I've had a disparity in performance in one of these channels. But if you group them all together, then it's like, I don't know which part of paid search stopped working very well.
And if you were doing that, if I gave someone 30 seconds to decide those channels,
Yeah.
you would still be better. You'd still be in a good spot. Even if I gave you 30 seconds, you would say things like, well, I want to know the difference between paid things versus organic things. And I would want to know difference between social things versus paid things. Like those are some of the highest level, yes, based on intent, like high intent traffic versus medium to low intent traffic.
Yeah.
And even at just some of those, if I sketched those on a napkin and I was like, okay, paid search versus organic and paid social versus organic and, email, like even at that level, you taking the reins of that and ahead of time is going to be much better than trying to rely on any of the analytics platform's ability just out of the box to properly categorize those, let alone taking it one step further and saying like paid branded versus non-branded, or paid upper funnel versus paid mid funnel versus paid low funnel. Like an individual business might be that sophisticated in how it's doing things, but you'd still be getting much better returns than the out of the box stuff, even if you just kept it high level there, right?
Totally. Yeah. You're absolutely right. You've done this as a marketer. You've thought through this stuff a bunch of times. So there's kind of, from a data perspective, there's two ways that you build a category like this. The first is you decide what sort of quality deserves a category at all. And so the way somebody comes to your site is a quality that deserves a category. And then you start to build layers in that. And you kind of outline some of those. You might say like, first, I just want to compare my paid versus my like natural unpaid sort of efforts. And that might be, when you report up to stakeholders, that might be the level that you report at, is we have this much paid and we've got this much that's sort of our evergreen stuff. But then as a marketer, you got to dig down a little deeper and you go, okay, I want to break paid into paid social, paid search, and break that down. And maybe at your marketing team level, that's how you talk about things. At your PPC performance level, you got to be talking about things even more granularly. So the better you can categorize both the actions, the metrics, the things that people do, and the visits that you get and the actions they take by the way that they've come to you, the easier it is when you go to like investigate a problem or ask and answer a question. The easier it is to go like, why has one of these things dipped over time? Well, which one has dipped? Has it been our paid bucket, or has it been our organic bucket? Like, well, great. Well, then drill in. And then all of a sudden, like, your categorization work makes your analysis work super easy. You don't even need an algorithm to do it anymore. Now it's just like click, drill. Now we know what's going on. We know where we have an area to either do lots more or change our strategy.
Okay, so you kicked us off with source as the way that people are coming to the site. Let's talk about like, what's the next thing for you that comes up for categorizing data?
I built a list of a few of these. I built a list of them, and I didn't do it in order of importance. The next one on my list was geography. And you get geographic data in a lot of your platforms. So like in Google Analytics, you get geo data by default. You'll get country, then you have state. If you're in the US, they call it region, but so province if you're in Canada or something, but region. Then you have city level data. And those are nice, especially if you don't have any geographic regions that you think about. But a lot of folks have like a service area or multiple service areas that they can serve. And so they go like, this is our, using Utah City, is like, here's our American Fork office, here's our Provo office, here's our Salt Lake office. And so rather than just relying on the Google Analytics city code, you could group a handful of related cities to make a metro or a neighborhood that's specific to your service area. So we have other scenarios. Oh, go
I
ahead.
just
Go
wanted to
ahead.
give a live example because we just had a
Yeah.
conversation last week with the manufacturer of what to me was incredibly appealing snow removal stuff. I was
Yeah.
super excited about the idea of potentially owning one of these snow removal devices. Um, and so they were talking to us about kind of the relation. Hey, we have these distribution areas, we've got these regions. We want to be able to give that engagement information to the people that are in charge of those regions. What you're saying is, if ahead of time, if we knew what those regions were, you could customize how the analytics data. If you've thought through what those regions are, you can group them and say, okay, well, these 5 cities make up our, southwest region, and so we're going to
Yep.
group those and label them the way that we talk about them internally, so that then when somebody has a question around performance in that region, we've already got the grouping around that to make the data more meaningful. Am I aligned there with what
Yeah,
you're?
you're exactly right. Here's an example from my experience. Internet service provider gets a giant spike in traffic, and everybody's like, "Oh, we got them this amazing new traffic from the state of California," and they only serve the Midwest.
Yeah.
So, like, they have service regions. They got 11 service regions or something in the Midwest. Giant spike in traffic from California and Oregon. Everybody, if they'd had the capability to group that by in like areas that we can serve versus areas that we cannot serve, then they would have known immediately when that spike, well, we got a big spike of traffic. What service area was it in? It's in a not service area.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Like, what is that about then? It's definitely not like our marketing that's causing that. What's caused that sort of a thing?
And what's
And
interesting is like an additional layer of the insight that gets provided when you do it that way is, oh, we got this big spike of traffic. Let's assume that the traffic was legitimate. It wasn't some bot or something like that, but it was
yeah,
like
yeah,
represented real interest.
yeah,
Then you can start to say things like, well, what was the nature of that interest in an area that
yeah,
we can't monetize the
yeah,
way we traditionally do? What can we do
yeah,
with that interest in those non-traditionally monetizable areas? And now, instead of having discussions around, oh, why did that happen? Oh, what's going on? It's conversations around how can we move the business forward based on what we're seeing in the data.
yep. The snow machinery manufacturer that you're talking about has a really good opportunity to categorize in areas where they have dealers and areas where they don't have dealers. So they can see when somebody searches some snow something where they don't have a dealer, they can go back and tell the manufacturers like, "Hey, we're getting interest in this area. We don't have any dealers to serve this though. Like we're giving you value that we can't even capitalize on in our sales, but we can tell you like this is good. You've
Right.
got some interest in these areas."
Or maybe it's
And
time to
if
go find a dealer that services those
that's
areas.
exactly right. It
Yeah.
tells you what it makes the actions that you could potentially take obvious. Like your analysis gets easy because you have good categorizations in the way you're looking at things.
Perfect. And that's because you put in the effort to think about how can we make data most meaningful for the business? Okay,
Yeah.
what's next on
I'm
your
going to
list?
add, and
Oh,
before we jump to the next
yeah,
category,
yeah.
let me just add a thought here because how you apply these categories is not necessarily obvious. And there's kind of two options. So option number one is you can do things in the data world. We call this early data binding and late data binding. Early data binding is something like when somebody visits our website, we're going to record at that point in time the things about them in the way that we want to look at them. So we're going to record their geographic area. That's kind of a hard thing to implement because you have to go like grab their IP address, find out where they're actually living, decide whether that is in or it is not in an area that you care about, and then mark it at the time that they visit your site. Late data binding is something where it's like after we've collected the data, we're going to just build categories. We're going to say if you're in one of these 50 cities, then you're in this region for us. And we build that into our reporting. And we bound that categorization to the data later, late data binding. So the early data binding has two limitations. One is when you record it at that point in time, if you ever make a mistake in the way you record it, you're toast. Like, or if you miss it, something breaks, you're toast. Also, it only works from the time you actually get it implemented to forward. It doesn't work retroactively. So as a principal, as a marketer, when somebody says, "Oh, we could do this in Google Tag Manager, we can make a little rule here, and then we can categorize this as either in area or not in area," a warning flag ought to go off, and you go, "Wait, hold on." That's early data binding. If that ever breaks, we're toast. Also, it doesn't work until we actually get it implemented forward. And probably the reason I have a question about this is because of something that is in the past. So that's just a flag. If you can lean to late data binding, then you win. Late data binding is something like when you extract the data from a system, you can, in GA4, if you can get this stuff into BigQuery, you can create some rules and some logic before you do your reporting, before you review your data, that categorizes the data at that point. Then if you ever need to change categorizations, it works historically for everything.
Yeah.
And then if you need to fix something, then it's fixable.
And
So,
I think, I mean, I've been in scenarios where I had to manually rewrite things, right? Where it's like,
yeah,
whoever did
yeah.
this initially, you know,
The
it's like I've got
CRM world, right?
I've got a source value in here that's potato. It's like, that's not a source. And now I have my rules moving forward, but how do I rationalize what happened before to my new categories? And when
Yeah.
you're doing that manually, it is literally like exporting CRM data, manipulating it in a spreadsheet, re-uploading it, overriding the fields. And you're doing that anytime, you know, you go like
Yeah.
a week and then the CEO's like, hey, I'd like to be able to see things this way. And you're like, oh my gosh, I just spent 10 hours. Now I have to go back
Recategorizing.
and redo this. So to your point
This
about the
is
red flag, it's like anytime you're making that categorization adjustment in a platform level scenario, it's like that should be the red flag where you're going, if I do this, or if I change jobs, or if someone underneath me changes jobs, it's very fragile versus a late binding scenario and doing it that way, right?
Yeah. Yes. And another kind of the way I like to think about it is it when the data is recorded, or is it before the data is visualized? Those, if this is when a lead gets created in a CRM, you're setting that value. That's a more permanent type of value assignment than the way you categorize something prior to building a visual. So just any of those scenarios, we see this in HubSpot sometimes too, where like people have these gnarly rat's nests of workflows trying to keep track of what was the source of this visit to the website at the time they filled out this form versus at the time they filled out this form versus at the time they started a chat.
Yeah, and
And
they've
it's
got
like,
like 10 different values.
yes. And then you
Yeah,
go like, what happens if you got one of those workflows wrong?
right.
Like, I don't even know. You'd have to export the whole database export all of HubSpot's data, recategorize it, and import it back in. I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And let alone like them spending mental energy around, let's say they did it all perfectly. It's like so much of the energy goes into maintaining that system and not nearly enough would go
Yeah.
into analyzing it. Even if you
Yeah.
had done it right,
Yeah.
what are you doing with that information? And it's like you're not doing, because you're spending so much time maintaining that super fragile system and making sure it's accurate week over week, and not thinking about what you can do to improve, or why you're even doing it in the first place. Okay.
Yep.
So moving on from geo, what's the next thing?
So this one this is the one where you're going to get excited about this. The next one on my list was content, how you categorize your content. And I'm throwing it back to you. If you say, when I'm a content creator and I want to be able to break it down and look at it by different things, what are those things that you want to be able to break it down by?
I think the easiest ones, I'll do the same kind of flow in my mind, is like, if you had 30 seconds, what would you do? And then kind of, if you had some more time, what would you do?
Sure.
And in 30 seconds, you'd want to know the difference between like your primary navigation pages. You know, you might like your homepage, maybe product pages. You'd want to know the difference between those. Like, so you'd have a category for administration, you know, admin stuff. Like, do you really care if they're visiting your, you know,
Privacy
your
page.
privacy policy, or, you know, different things like that. So like, get rid of those, but then group things like the high level interest pages on your nav. And then like, you might just say all blog. If you've done a good job categorizing your blog, you might layer those things in. I've never seen that. I assume that some people do it well, but most people don't. It's on the, so it's just all blog content. And then you would have call to action content. So if I had limited amount of time, it's like homepage, producty kind of pages, and then blog content, and then action item pages. Those would be my highest levels of categorization.
Yeah.
If I had more time, I would push that into customer journey. I would start aligning the pages specifically with customer journey. And there's a huge, it is so beneficial. Even if I were to say, well, look, company, you've got 2,000 pages that are indexed in your site, I would still be willing, like, we need to sit down and figure out what's the way that we can categorize these pages based on customer journey, so that we can interpret the data meaningfully. So what of this content is meant to influence people who have never known of you before and are just being introduced to what you do? What kind of content is meant to show them how your product solves their problem? What is meant to actually give them an experience with the product itself? So you're starting to do like awareness, consideration, the buy now, the CTA, those kinds of things. And there it seems intimidating if I said, oh, you have a list in Excel of 2,000 pages. It seems like, oh my gosh, I have to go page by page. Well, not really. Like typically, even within your URL strings, it's
Group those
relatively
things, yeah.
easy to kind of group things and get yourself started. Now, it's still like if you sat me down, it's probably still like a 4 to 6 hour process to actually go through all of that stuff. But once you've done the backlog of work, then you're set up for so much potential success when you start saying, how influential is our upper funnel content? How influential is it at moving people through and getting them to actually buy and love the product and then advocate on our behalf?
So I haven't shown you yet this, but our product team in the last week just showed me a demo of a page categorization builder using a large language model. So what you do is you give it like we did this on a site that had more than 10,000 pages, more than 10,000 URLs, a publisher site. You give it a URL and it goes through and scrapes through the site and it looks for the name, the title of the page. It looks through the description, the meta description of the page. And then you say, how many category levels do you want? Do you want like 3 big main ones and then like up to 15 or 20 like medium level ones, then like 50 granular ones? And in about 6 or 7 minutes, it categorized 10,000 pages. And when you look at the categorizations, you look at it and go, I think I'd only change maybe 5% of these.
A handful of things. Wow. Well,
and even cooler than that, then it builds a table for use in a database so that you can then use it as a lookup. So now it's available for your use in reporting. So you can say, just like based on URL, it looks up the URL and says, here's your 3 layers of content categories. So all you do is just load that into reporting. And now all of a sudden, you got page categorization for everything. 5 minutes.
Well, that's incredibly useful because as new pages come online, and of all the things that marketers are tasked with doing, like I think about the minutia sort of stuff. And in the minutia category for me is like properly tagging all of your internal and external links, categorizing pages. Like to me, that's the most boring part of the whole process. But it's so vital to making sure that your data is meaningful. But you spend more time thinking about like, oh, the hope of like what this content is going to do and how awesome it's going to be. You don't really spend time thinking about, oh, it's going to be so cool to like tag this with my UTM parameters. But having a tool like that to automate that process, and then I assume that there's the potentiality of like flagging things that didn't get categorized or recognizing where there's mismatches.
Yeah.
And that becomes, instead of an hours long process, if it's a minutes long process, then it just gets so much easier and more meaningful to transform the data. So
yeah, so I'll comment on 2 things here, just some of the other ways I like to think about categorizing content. And then I want to just call out early versus late data binding here. Early data binding is the approach of let's go through our content management system and let's assign every piece of content a top level category, a mid level category, and a lower level category. That sucks and then we'll feed that into Tag Manager, and then we'll feed that into our analytics system, and then we'll feed it into our reports. Sucks because it doesn't work until we do all of that work, and then it works from that point forward. We have all those URLs. If we can just build the categories based on these URLs, then it works. Then that's a late data binding approach where we get all the value in the past and all the value in the future. And if somebody goes, hey, that one doesn't match exactly right, you set that category wrong. Great. Switch it, fixed in the past and in the future. Wonderful.
And the other application of that, so correct me if I'm mistaken here, is I remember doing this for a previous company. So spoiler background, I guess. I was the director of marketing for a manufacturing e-com brand, and AdMind was the analytics provider that I was working with. So I remember working on this with you specifically, where it was like I could categorize that content and then start seeing the reporting. And if I had made a mistake in my categorization, I could just update my categories and rewrite history instead of being like, oh my gosh, I got to spend so much time and stress making sure I get this right. It's more of like, nah, just give it as much time as you can, see what the numbers look like, give it some more time, see what the numbers look like. And every single time you do that, the data is getting more and more meaningful until you get to a point where you go, like we have a handle on how things are categorized. And we're
Yeah.
spending less time talking about that and more time talking about what we're seeing in the data and getting new ideas about how we can make the most of what we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a couple other things that I like to think about in content categorizations, and we can move on. But I like thinking about the persona for which this content was created, because sometimes those are different if you're in an org. The author, sometimes you have a lot of different post creators, and sometimes it's nice to go like, who's actually working well. And this is true even in like your web content, your blog, but it's also true in your posting, like in your social posts. The topic of that post or of that piece of content, the specific call to action for that piece of content. So if this is a contact sales sort of one, or if this is a sign us up for a newsletter or an email or get access to a white paper sort of thing. I like sometimes topics, you'll have like a content category that's very hierarchical. Like this one is about computers and this one is about specifically processors and computers. This is about Intel processors. Those are sort of like content categories. I like the idea of topics too, where that are more like tags, content tags. So make sure you have topic and tag represented. For people who are doing a lot of publishing, knowing the published date is also helpful too, to see what the ramp of your content looks like as it gets indexed and as it becomes irrelevant, what the decline looks like. So being able to group things and say like, what is our ask and answer a question like, what is our content performance after 6 months of publish, comparing our topic 1 versus topic 2? Which of those topics get stale fastest? So those are some of the content categorizations that I think are helpful.
If anybody out there is getting sort of lost and in the depth there, like an easy thing to do here is if you just had columns on a spreadsheet and you're like, here is the piece of content, and you go, what are the ways that I would want to look at this by? And we rattled off a bunch there, from like the topic of the content, the category of the content, the persona, who is it meant to influence, where are they at in the journey, who is the author of that content, maybe some tags, and I would just put those as column headings and then say like, okay, if I had all this information, is this meaningful? What do I care? What do I not care about? If you do late binding, you can always come back and add more to it. But just as a first pass, I would list those out as column headings in a spreadsheet just to give you an idea of how you would. And then it's like piece of content, check, piece of content, check, and then you start getting an idea for how you're gonna do it. The one in there, I just want to add, we keep adding things onto the content category here, but the topic one is very interesting to me because a brand can get lost in attacking every possible topic in what they perceive to be their area of influence without really thinking about, if I had 1,000 pieces of content about 1,000 different topics, how am I ever going to know if I'm getting better as an authority in one of those? So my only recommendation there is with your topics, tags can be different, but with your topics, you should really give some thought to what are like the 3 to 5 main things that we want to be known for? And then how would I categorize my content within the topical categories of those, 3 to 5 main things? And if you're a publisher, like we have some do good in the world publishers out there, and their topic list might be a little bit longer because that's what they transact in, is topics themselves. But for
imagine being able to ask and answer a question like, what is the most common topic that somebody reads or consumes before they become a qualified lead?
Yeah.
The question's not that hard of a question to ask and answer of the data if the categorization's there.
Right. Okay. Well, in the interest of time, let's talk about one more. Now, you might have what's next on your list. I'm gonna say what's next on mine, and then you and I are gonna decide which one we want to talk about. So,
all right, you go. We'll do yours.
All right. Well, I think we haven't given a ton of love in this conversation to how this gets applied to e-commerce specific brands, and so I think it's worth talking about how that categorization is a little bit more self-explanatory, but still needs a little bit of mapping. And so what's been your experience as you've dealt with e-commerce brands? How would you categorize e-commerce data? Give us a little 101 on how you would do that.
So much of this is just how you look at your product catalog. So usually there's product categories. Most of the time there's layers of product categories if you have more than just a handful of products. Some of the things that are useful though, and again, think about early and late data binding here, because you have the scenario, you're so tempted to just like populate that whole product catalog on a product detail page with all the things that you might want to track. And if you add something later, but all of that stuff is bound early, then you're cemented into the way the data was collected at that point in time. So it's better to just say, give me the product ID. This is the ideal world. Give me the product ID of the product that was seen. And then all of that catalog metadata stuff, let's just join that after the fact. So we can pull any of the reports we want by any of the season that the product belongs to, any of the colors or color families that the product belongs to, any of the styles, any of the like desired target. Is it men's or is it women's or is it kids sort of stuff? Like all that stuff. Those are the things that you can add later. And you don't have to worry about having the categorizations at the time you're collecting it. By the way, the cost of implementing late data binding versus early data binding, it's way cheaper to implement late data binding. Early data binding means you have to involve your dev team to tag all that stuff out. They have to build additional code. You have to involve somebody to build out the tag management system to handle that and send it to the places that it needs to be sent to. And then you have to do the configuration in the analytics interface. On the other side of it, all you have to do is that sort of spreadsheet type of work. It doesn't, the ways this works best is when it's not actually done in a nasty Excel, but the spreadsheet flavor of function where you're just listing those things out. And many times in e-commerce, you can just download from the e-commerce platform everything by product ID and just say, I want those columns already there. So then like you've already got the spreadsheet work done because you're creating that information when you're building out the product lists to put on the site anyway.
Awesome. Okay, any other thoughts on e-com?
I think that there are some things, this is one that's a little bit more complicated, but like, I think that a lot of times from an e-commerce perspective, one of the things that you're thinking about is which products relate to which other products, both from an accessory perspective. And then when people come in looking for this, are they actually really looking for that sort of flow? And so sometimes the sequence of products that are viewed is, in fact, many times the sequence of products that are viewed is pretty important in determining both if you have successful product finding methods built into your site, your product search is working well, and your recommendation lists are working well. But those things can be, you don't have to record last viewed product at the time somebody views a product. You have the data and the sequence of all of the things that people have done as they've gone through your site. You can ask and answer that question in a late bound fashion. You can just say, let me use the data to build a picture of what the last viewed product was before this specific product was added to cart. So again, that's a little bit, the sequence matters in e-commerce, and it's a good way to categorize the behavior, but it doesn't have to be done early binding.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to ask an e-com question because I think about this a lot. Can you have something that exists in multiple categories? Meaning, like I have a product and I want to know I want to know its performance when it's offered as an add-on in the cart experience versus, it's like I sell X and when I offer this other Y product as an add-on, here's its performance versus this Y product add-on's performance individually. Is that stuff that we can do with?
Yeah. Usually we call that, so if you do a good job thinking about the basic fundamentals that you need when you first collect the data, then almost all of that can be done with a late data binding strategy. But we'll call that product finding method. Did somebody find that product by site search? Did they find it by category browsing, or did they find it by recommended list add-on? And maybe that's even more granular, like recommended list add-on on product detail page versus recommended at checkout upsell. Yeah. So product finding method is a good way to categorize the behavior as well.
Awesome. Well, we're at the end. We appreciate you sticking with us. We appreciate the time that you've taken to learn a little bit more about analytics, and hopefully this has been helpful for you. If you have questions, if there's something that we've missed, we did not set out to cover all possible ways that you could categorize your data. If there's things that are top of mind for you that we've missed, we'd love to hear about it. You can reach out to us on our website, on any of our social platforms. You can comment and throw it out there. We'd love to respond and see what things are top of mind for you. Anyway, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.